Welcome to Hancock's VMware Half Hour. And welcome back to another Hancock's VMware Half Hour. Okay, so in tonight's video, we're going to talk about partitions. So if you're a newbie, grab yourself a cup of tea, cup of coffee, soft drink, sit back and have a listen and have a watch. If you're not so newbie and you know all about partitions, then you can skip to the very end and like or not like and subscribe. Okay, so partitions. What can we talk about partitions? I think we're going to start off with I wrote an article back in 2012, over 12 years ago now, in May. Which was how to resize a VMware virtual disk, a VMDK. And that article is on Experts Exchange, and I'll put that in the description for you to have a little read of. And this video tonight is going to build on that. But we're going to explain a few little bits and pieces as well that make it more relevant, I think, to 2025. I was going to say 2026. I must have a time machine out the back. I think partitions, certainly, to bring this and to update this in 2025. And this actually really comes about with a couple of questions that I've answered on Experts Exchange. And I'm obviously seeing more of these questions now on Reddit and Experts Exchange. And it sort of kind of surprises me, really, to be honest with you, that I think maybe there's still some people out there, some administrators, that are maybe noticing this more now because it happens when you build virtual machines with Windows 10 or Windows 11, certainly 2016, 2019, 2022 and 2025. And I think more recently, I noticed it again, which was what really left the seed. As I said, I answered a question about this on Experts Exchange last week. And then in our last videos, in our homelab videos that we were doing with our Windows Server 2025 server and our Tape 03 server, if you've not seen them, you can find them on the tube. And I noticed the partition, and I thought, okay, maybe we really need to go back to the very beginning again and talk about partitions in VMware vSphere. So the first thing I'm going to do, which again is another question really that comes up a lot, and this question really comes up with we're running out of space on our virtual machine disk. This is applicable really to Fusion, VMware Workstation, VMware vSphere, VMware Server, if you want to go back that far. But it's applicable really to any VMware virtual machine today. And I've often said to many administrators that I've met over in the years, it's always better to create a small virtual disk, a small VMDK. It also is applicable really to VHDXs or VHD in Hyper-V, or any virtualization system. We've got great control and flexibility and management of virtual machines and storage. And by that, I mean that if we want to basically make a 16 gig virtual machine, then we can create a virtual machine that's 16 gig. We can chop it up to present to the OS. We can't do that with, a 1 terabyte NVMe stick is 1 terabyte. The only way that we can actually chop that up really is if we actually basically partition it. But with VMware vSphere and any other virtualization platform, we don't have to super allocate 1 terabyte of virtual disk to a machine that's never ever going to need any of that. It's a complete waste. And I think I see this all the time. I think people get maybe a little bit confused in a virtual environment, that they see all this storage space on their storage platform, and they think, oh, need to basically create a virtual machine disk. Okay, let's give the operating system, or let's give the machine 500 gig or 1 terabyte. Well, the downside to that is that once you've actually committed 1 terabyte or 500 gig to a disk, you can't easily claim it back. There isn't an easy mechanism to reduce or shrink the size of the virtual disk. You know, the only supported method to shrink the virtual disk in VMware vSphere is to use VMware vCenter Converter. And maybe we'll come on to that in the next video. And maybe I'll do a couple of videos again on shrinking virtual disks in VMware vSphere. So which is why I often say to people, you know, start small. It's easy to grow a virtual disk, but it's difficult, or more work is involved to shrink it. So start off small. You know, there's another argument that actually basically states that, you know, when creating a virtual machine, when creating Microsoft Windows Server 2025, which roughly speaking probably is going to require 90 to 120 gig as an operating system, when you factor in all those updates that you're going to have to give that as well. But don't forget, if you start small, 90 gig, you can grow that slowly over time. There's not really any need to give it 120 gig. You can give it 90 and you can grow it. If you give it a 500 gig disk, then you've already used up a lot of your storage. And again, it's going to be difficult to claim that back. There are mechanisms to do it, but as I said, it's going to involve some work to do it. So start small and grow them. And, you know, there are arguments that actually basically state that the C drive, the first physical disk in a machine in Windows, really should just contain the operating system. It shouldn't contain any data. It shouldn't contain any applications. It shouldn't contain SQL. So add another virtual disk. And this is really where we actually basically come on to partitions, really. You know, in the old days, I want to talk about the old days. I mean, back in the days when a 32 megabyte hard disk was the largest size we had, you know, and I'm talking, you know, 10 meg hard disks. And I'm sort of kind of now going back to 1980 or 1979 when we had a 10 meg disk. Eventually, when we got MS-DOS, and I think Microsoft is 50 years old, I think, is it this week? When we eventually got MS-DOS for the first time, then a 32 megabyte disk was fine. But later on, when disks actually started to grow beyond 32 meg, MS-DOS could not create a partition on the entire surface of the disk. So you had to actually basically start carving up the disk into partitions and creating logical partitions and extended partitions for us to use the disks. So partitions don't really have any place today, I don't think, in a virtual machine environment. Now, I'm just actually going to switch quickly to our test machine that we're going to use in this video. And this is a Windows Server 2025. It's a fresh install. So I've created the virtual disk in VMware vSphere. It's created in exactly the same way that I did a video about this. 90 gig virtual disk, and I've installed the operating system onto the first physical disk. And this is how Microsoft Windows Server 2025 lays out the disk. And you will notice that the first 100 meg partition, partition 0, is the ESXi system partition. The second partition, or disk, is probably, I think that this is disk 0, partition 2. No, partition 3. This is disk 0, partition 3, which is a 89.23 gigabyte NTFS partition. So that's where the operating system is installed. And then tagged on the end, a 674 megabyte healthy recovery partition at the end of the disk. Now, a lot of questions are asked when people want to extend the disk. And we're going to extend the disk now. So let's pretend that our C drive is running out of space and we want to extend the disk. A lot of people basically come in, have and report an issue because when they try and extend the disk, and we'll do that now. So if we go back to our VMware vSphere HTML client, and I reach to Actions, followed by Edit Settings. And to extend the disk, all we want to do is change the number next to our hard disk there to 100. Oh, our first problem that we're encountering is it's grayed out. Now, this is another question that comes up a lot of the time. Why is it grayed out? Well, quite simply, it's grayed out because in this particular case, I've created a snapshot. And if you've got a virtual machine running on a snapshot, and there it is, beginning snapshot. If you've got a virtual machine running on a snapshot, it is impossible to expand the disk. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to delete that snapshot. Now, I basically created that snapshot deliberately to show you that particular scenario, that we cannot extend the disk if a snapshot is in play. The snapshot is a delta disk. The parent disk is chained to the snapshot, and you cannot alter the geometry of the disk by creating a snapshot, by extending the disk if a snapshot is actually in place. So if we now go back to our virtual machine, so if I just expand that for you, there's our machine. What I'm going to do now, let's just turn that off. I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. So I'm going to go Actions, I'm going to go Edit, and this time the number will not be grayed out. Can you see now that I can actually basically type in freeform in there? Now, we're not actually basically typing in how much we want to grow the disk by. We're actually typing in the new fixed size of the disk that we want. So I'm just going to basically type 100. So don't go silly, don't go mad. As I said to you, we can grow the disk slowly. We don't have to be basically silly and put 200 gig in there or 500 gig in there, because then once we've done that, the disk space is actually allocated. So I'm basically going to just put 100, and I'm going to click OK. Now, that's physically changed the geometry of the virtual disk, the VMDK. The VMDK has now changed itself to 100 gig. And if I basically just expand our RDP session, if I now basically go to Actions and I click do a rescan, it will rescan the disk. And can you now see our problem? Now, again, this is a problem which I encounter a lot, which happens quite a lot. If you install Windows operating system, 10, 11, 2016, 2019, 2022, 2025, you will see this. If you actually basically have a little look at your partition layout, you will see you've got 3 partitions. And people basically then expand the disk, just as we've done. We've got 10 gig. They then go right click, and they then basically turn around and say, why can't I extend my C drive? Why is extend grayed out? Well, quite simply, it's grayed out because the only way that we can expand that partition C or extend that partition C is if we've got free space that's contiguous. Now, contiguous is a bit of a funny word, really, and I don't really like it, to be honest with you. But in layman's terms, to expand the C drive, we've actually basically got to have unallocated space right next to that partition, right next to it. So that 10 gig really has got to be there where the healthy recovery partition is. So there are a number of ways that we can accommodate this. And in the old days, if I just turn that off and I go back to my article, what did I say in the old days? V2V, yeah, we could do a virtual to virtual conversion using VMware Converter Standalone. That would grow our disk. That could do that. We could use Dell XPart. Not quite sure that's a thing anymore. That was in 2003. So that particular software package, even if you can find it, is 22 years old. But we have to use a third-party utility, or we use DiskPart. Now, which third-party utility do you use? Apologies about that. My sticker off my Cambridge Labs Stream Magic has just fallen off. Let's see if I can stick that back up there, and it's not gonna fall off again. Sorry, apologies. Okay, so if we go back to our virtual machine, the only way we can, as I said, we can do it two ways. We could use DiskPart, that's actually basically inbuilt to our operating system, or we could use a third-party utility. And there are lots of third-party utilities, but what we're going to do in this video, we're going to have a look at three. We're going to look at the old favorite that I still really like today, and that's called gparted live CD-ROM. It's an ISO, and we put that ISO into the server, we shut down, we restart, it boots gpart live, which is a Linux distro, off the CD-ROM, and that allows us to mangle the partitions. Did I say mangle the partitions? Manipulate the partitions. Or we can use AOMEI or AOMEI, Partition Assistance Standard, which is something that you're going to have to install on your Windows server. Or we could use the free partition manager software by ESXi. You know, these products have been around for donkey's years. You know, it says there since 2004. I think IOMI really has probably been around. Personally, I'm not really a great fan of them. One, because I've got to install them in the OS, and I'm not really a fan of installing these type of packages in the operating system. I don't really know whether or not that they bring nagware with them or scamware with them or any other stuff. But that's, you know, really up to you. The other thing that I'm not really a fan of, I'm not really a fan of doing in-place partition mangling in the operating system. Now, these don't really do that, because what they actually do, they actually basically create a job, they then shut down and restart the machine, then they actually basically do the partition mangling, and then after that they restart the machine again. So what I'm saying is that if you actually basically want to use some of these third parties, you're going to have to schedule and you're going to have to get some downtime in. If you don't want to schedule the downtime, then you probably have to use the inbuilt utilities to do it. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my VMware vSphere client again, my HTML client, and I'm going to create a snapshot. Now, I've already extended the virtual disk, so that bit's done. I can't roll that back. But what I can roll back is I can roll back changes within the operating system. So this really gives me, so I'm just going to call it beginning partition mangle. So this just allows me, like in production, I would probably do this. Partition mangling does go wrong. So you want to ensure that you have actually basically got a mechanism to roll back those changes if you want to. But in the lab here, this is actually basically going to give me the option to make some changes with one particular product. Then we can have a little look at how it's worked out. Then I can actually basically revert, and we can basically do the same change over and over and over again, just for lab purposes. So the first product I'm going to use is I'm going to use the gparted live CD-ROM product. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to insert that ISO into the CD-ROM drive, and we're going to shut down and we're going to restart the machine. Don't worry, the snapshot's still going to basically give us the ability to roll back these changes, even though that we're going to shut down and restart. So cheated a little bit here, because I do have access to the NFS ISOs folder on the NAS via a Windows share. So I can very quickly drop the gparted live CD-ROM onto that share fairly quickly. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to have a little look at the summary. I'm going to launch a HTML client session. There's our disk. So what we're going to do with gpart live CD, which is actually in our CD-ROM drive there, we're going to move this partition down. I'm going to move this one up. Or we could delete the recovery partition. The recovery partition, I don't think really plays any part at all in a VMware virtual environment or any virtual environment, because if you actually want to recover a virtual machine, you're going to do it using snapshots. You're going to do it via your backup and restore mechanism, or you could just quite simply insert another Windows server or Windows 11 or Windows 10 ISO in the CD-ROM drive, boot the virtual machine. So really, to be honest with you, in all the virtual machines that we set up, we have nuked the recovery partition, and then when we've created our template, it doesn't basically include the recovery partition ever. And if we need to expand, we don't have to go through this palaver of messing around, moving the recovery partition or deleting the recovery partition. But if you didn't know that, then you can certainly work on that in the future. So I'm going to basically just click restart, other planned. I'm going to have to better get jiggy with it here, because this is going to boot so fast that, there we go. That wasn't too bad. So there we go. This is now booting the gparted live CD-ROM, which looks a bit Linux-ish, because it is. And it's actually basically running the GNOME partition editor, which is actually the same software package that you can download and install or grab from the repo on any Linux distro. So you don't really need to download gpart live CD-ROM. You could actually basically use any Linux distro has gparted in it for you to do basically partition mangling. Did I say mangling? Management. Okay, so we're just actually waiting for this to... Oh, okay. So I don't want to touch the key map. 33, is that British? US English? 33. Force. Continue to start. Yeah, we'll just do that. And hopefully we're going to get a GUI. And when we get the GUI, we may not actually have any mouse control. That might be fun. But we will have access to the keyboard, so we can do some stuff with. So this is what gparted looks like. Physical representation of our disk. So this disk in the middle here, the 89.23 gigabyte or 90 gig disk, is partition dev SDA3. This is the partition that we want to grow into, because of course what we're trying to do is to grow this particular partition, which is our operating system partition. And this little partition in the middle here, this little piggy in the middle, this is the one that is getting in the way, that we need to move. So quite simply what we want to do is we want to move it to the end of the disk. And if by moving that to the end of the disk means that that unallocated space is going to move up the disk, that unallocated space is then going to be contiguous with that partition, and we'll be able to then grow that partition into that partition. Did you get that? Maybe it's easier if you watch. So I'm going to highlight that partition, and I'm going to say resize or move. So what I actually basically want to say is free space following this partition, really I want 0. So I actually basically want 0 space after that partition. So by doing that, that's moving it down the disk. I'll be all day long doing that. So I'm just going to put 0 in there, and I say resize. Moving a partition might cause your operating system to fail. Yes, I understand that. So by moving that partition down the disk, that effectively is move that partition up the disk. So the fact that now that partition 3 there is next to that unallocated space, that now allows us to resize this partition. So it's now basically saying free space following this partition, we want 0. Resize. Okay, so it's not made any changes yet. It's only going to basically make the changes when we click the tick or apply them. So this is what our new partition is going to look like. And for some strange reason, we've got one little bit of space at the end here. So let's just see again. It's probably, let's have a little look. So if we say resize and we want 0 at the end and say resize, okay. So that's actually basically now, let's just say resize. We want 0 at the end. Are you getting this? Or are you getting confused? Resize, okay. We've still got one meg allocated. Could be a rounding error, that potentially. But anyway, so we're hopefully going to expand our dev SDA3, which is just Linux terms for partition 3, but that actually basically contains our NTFS 90 gig partition, and we're going to grow that by 10 gig. And we've moved this recovery partition down the end of the disk. I could just delete that if I wanted. I could just turn around and say, I don't want the recovery partition, so let's just delete it and get rid of it. But let's just leave it for the moment. So I'm going to hit the big tick. Now, of course, remember that I've got a snapshot in place here. So if this all goes Pete Tong, then I can basically just go back to the virtual machine and say, revert, please. And it will put us back where we were before I started mangling partitions. So I'm going to click now, apply. Editing partitions has the potential to cause loss of data. Good call, it does. That's why I basically use the word mangling partitions, because partitions do get mangled and data gets mangled. So I'm going to click apply. Now, depending upon how fast your underlying data store is, this is actually basically running on an all-flash vSAN. Yeah, we finally fixed our vSAN cluster here in the lab. But again, this still can take a little bit of time basically to do all this data move and shunting up and down the disk, etc. It's not instant. So, you know, it's telling us that we've got to wait 20 minutes. So tell you what I'll do. I'm going to bob off as I normally do. I need to go and speak to somebody. I think somebody's rang me before. Telephone's beeping here. You can probably hear that because for some strange reason, noise cancelling doesn't pick it up. So I'm going to speed all this up in post, and I will come back shortly as well. So so I will catch you shortly. Okay, so my bad. You may have noticed different t-shirt because it's a different day. Because I actually basically set this mangling the partitions yesterday evening, and I completely forgot about it, and came back this afternoon at lunchtime and went, oh, I never actually finished that video. Anyway, so here we are where we actually basically left off, and eventually all the operations have been successfully completed. So now I'm basically just going to click close, Okay, so after completing that first operation, I've noticed that I've successfully moved the recovery partition to the end of the disk, and I've moved the 90 gig partition to the end of the disk, but our 10 gig allocated partition, it's not quite a partition yet, but our unallocated portion of the disk is at the beginning of our 90 gig partition. And the whole point was to actually extend this 90 gig partition into the unallocated component. So I can quite simply do this by, again, selecting resize. I can use the GUI. So I'm basically going to drag the partition now up into that unallocated portion, and I'm going to click resize move. Okay, general warning about partition mangling here. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to click the big tick, which basically is going to apply those changes. And I'm going to basically click apply. And I'm going to wait for that change to complete. Where again, it's actually basically going to move the partition 3 into that space to effectively grow it by 90 gig, and that's actually basically telling me that it's going to take 7 minutes. So I'll come back in 7 minutes time. I'll remember this time, and I'll speed this up in post. So I'll be back shortly. And we're back, and we're done. I'll click close. So that is the actual changes that have been committed to the partition layout. So as you can see, we now have a 99.23 gigabyte partition 3. The recovery partition has been moved to the end, and this 1 meg allocated, I think, is just a rounding error at the end. So what we wanted to do has been completed by gparted. So now I'm just basically going to quit. I'm going to exit, and we'll restart our Windows Server 2025, and we'll see first of all whether or not the server still boots. We've not got no blue screen of death error, and we'll check in disk management, and we'll see. I'm just trying to exit, and it's just being a little bit temperamental. Okay, so we now want to reboot. It's going to ask me basically to eject the CD-ROM from the CD-ROM drive. I'm going to click enter. I'm going to shut down and restart, and Windows Server 2025 is going to start. And we'll log in quickly. We'll have a little look in disk management, and we'll see whether or not that all the changes are as we wanted in our partition manipulation or mangling exercise. And of course, we are running on a snapshot. So if anything actually went wrong, that we could actually basically roll it back. We can roll back the operating system change, because of course, as I pointed out, that if we are actually running on a snapshot, we cannot extend the virtual disk. That is impossible. So let's just run disk management, and there we go. As you can see, we've got a 99.23 gigabyte NTFS partition, and we've still preserved the healthy recovery partition if you want to keep it. As I've said, I don't really personally think that there's any point really in having these in a virtual environment, because we can recover virtual machines far quicker than having a recovery partition hanging on the end of the disk, which is actually basically causes us issues if we actually basically want to extend or expand. But in this particular video, I just thought I'd actually basically show you using gparted live CD-ROM, how we can keep the recovery partition and extend our partition if we want. Okay, so QED, we've proved that we can use gparted live CD-ROM attached to a virtual machine to reboot the virtual machine. We can use gparted to manipulate our partitions. In a particular case, we've moved our recovery partition to the end of the disk, and we've also grown, expanded, extended our operating system partition from 90 gig approximately to 100 gig approximately. So that's it in this video. If you've enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up and a like. If you don't like this video, then give a thumbs down and don't likey, and put a description as to why you've not liked it. But don't forget to subscribe, and come back in the next 2 or 3, 4 or 5, 6, 7 or 8 or 9, 10 videos that we do, because we're going to have a little look at the we'll do another video on the free partition manager, AOMEI partition assistant standard. Then we'll do another one on EASUS as well, and then I may also basically go back to our friend VMware converter, or VMware vSphere standalone converter, and do a virtual to virtual conversion, which can extend the virtual disk and the operating system partition in one process. Anyway, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. So all the best, and goodbye.